She never expected the quiet knock on the back porch door to change the rhythm of her heart. Yet the moment Serafina turned and saw Rowan standing there, rain dripping from his coat and uncertainty in his eyes, something inside her paused, the kind of pause that feels like the air itself forgets how to move. For years, Rowan had been nothing more than her husband Adrian's closest friend, a reserved man, gentle in his own distant way, always polite, always careful, always keeping a respectful space between them. Serafina had assumed that was simply his personality, until that night, when he looked at her as if he was finally ready to say something he had been holding for far too long. It began earlier that evening. Adrian had left for a late shift, promising he would be home before midnight. Serafina stayed up, folding laundry in the warm living room, when the storm rolled in, soft at first, then sudden and loud, shaking the windows and filling the house with an uneasy echo. She sighed, wondering if Adrian had taken an umbrella. She wondered, too, if Rowan, who lived a short walk away, was safe in this weather. She had always sensed something fragile about him, not weakness, but a quiet ache he never spoke about. He rarely shared anything personal, not even with Adrian. Serafina sometimes imagined Rowan carried memories that felt too heavy for words. Still, she never expected him to show up at her door. When she opened it, Rowan looked startled, almost as if he regretted knocking the second she appeared. His voice trembled slightly when he said her name. She stepped aside without questioning him. "Come in, you're soaked." Rowan hesitated, glancing at the floor, then finally crossed the threshold. She fetched him a clean towel, which he accepted with a grateful nod. When he sat at the edge of the sofa, the storm rumbled overhead, making his shoulders tense. Serafina could feel something was wrong. She moved slowly, sitting in the chair across from him. "Rowan, is everything all right?" For a moment, he didn't answer. He just stared at his hands, as if the words were trapped there. Then he lifted his gaze, and for the first time since she had known him, he let her see the turmoil behind his quiet eyes. "I didn't know where else to go," he said softly. "I needed to talk to someone who wouldn't judge me." The admission caught her breath. Rowan? Trusting her? After all these years of gentle distance? She leaned forward, her voice warm. "You can talk to me. Whatever it is, I'll listen." His expression shifted, relief mixed with fear. As the thunder rolled again, Rowan exhaled like he had been holding something in for far too long. "It's about something I should have said a long time ago," he murmured. "Something I've avoided because I didn't want to hurt anyone, especially you." Her heart tightened unexpectedly, startled by the softness in his tone. She tried to steady herself, reminding her racing thoughts that Rowan was just a friend, Adrian's friend, a man who rarely let anyone close. Yet here he was, opening up to her in the dim glow of the storm-lit living room. "What is it?" she asked gently. He swallowed hard. "Serafina, I think I've misled everyone about how strong I really am. I've been pretending to be fine for so long, and tonight, something finally broke." Her breath softened. "You don't have to pretend anymore." For a moment, Rowan closed his eyes, as if her words were a warmth he wasn't used to feeling. When he opened them again, something unspoken lingered there. Something delicate, something he wasn't ready to reveal fully, not yet. Serafina felt her guard shift, almost without her permission. She had always been kind to him, yes, but now, looking at him as he struggled to trust her, she felt something gentler rise inside her, a protective softness, almost instinctive. The storm outside grew louder, almost as if urging him to continue. Rowan drew in a slow breath, preparing to speak again. But before he could, the porch light flickered, and the room dimmed, leaving only the sound of rain and the weight of whatever he was about to confess. She knew, with sudden clarity, that whatever he said next would change something between them forever. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. Then Rowan lifted his eyes toward her and finally began to speak. The words Rowan finally gathered seemed to tremble in the air before he spoke them. Serafina felt her breath slow, bracing herself for something she couldn't yet name. The storm outside softened for a moment, as if offering him room to speak. "I haven't been myself for a long time," he said quietly, "and I've hidden it so well that even Adrian didn't notice. But you always seemed to see something I tried to bury." Serafina blinked gently. "I never wanted to intrude. I just worried about you." He nodded, gripping the towel in his hands as though grounding himself. "That's exactly why I'm here, because you never pushed, you never treated me like a burden." He paused. "Tonight, I realized I couldn't keep pretending. I needed someone who feels safe." Safe. The word caught her in the chest. She wasn't sure why it meant so much coming from him. Rowan had always been a quiet presence, thoughtful, careful, a man who blended into the background unless someone looked closely. And she had always looked closely, not because she was drawn in any dangerous way, but because something about his stillness seemed filled with unspoken pains. "What made tonight different?" she asked softly. Rowan's shoulders dipped, as though he felt weighed down by something invisible. "A conversation I had with Adrian earlier," he said. "He told me he was worried about me. I brushed it off, like I always do. But when I walked home, the storm hit and the lights went out in the street. I don't know, something in me just cracked. I didn't want to go home. It felt too empty." His voice trembled on that last word. Serafina leaned forward, her hands clasped gently on her knees. "I'm glad you came here, truly." He looked at her then, really looked, and she felt her guard soften again, the way it had the moment he arrived. Not in a forbidden sense, but in a deeply human one. She felt the weight he carried, the loneliness he masked, and the trust he was finally allowing himself to feel. "I don't want to be a burden to either of you," he murmured. "You're not," she said firmly. "You never were." Rowan's eyes glistened faintly. He looked away quickly, embarrassed by his own emotion. "You've always been kind, Serafina. Sometimes more kind than I knew how to handle." She smiled faintly. "Kindness isn't meant to be handled. It's meant to be felt." Rowan let out a breath that shivered through him. For a brief moment, he seemed lighter, as though her words had loosened a knot he'd carried too long. Then he sat back, resting his hands on his knees, as if deciding where to begin. "I should have told Adrian this, but I couldn't," he whispered. "I trust him, but there are some things a person can only say once. And tonight, for some reason, I felt I could say them to you." Her heart tightened, gentle, steady, understanding. "You can," she said softly. "Whatever it is, I'm here." Rowan's fingers curled slightly against the sofa. "For years, I pretended I was fine, that my past didn't affect me anymore. But the truth is, I've been afraid of forming connections, afraid of needing people." Serafina's voice softened with instinctive warmth. "Needing people doesn't make you weak." "It used to," he replied, a faint ache in his tone. "In my childhood, when things were unpredictable, it always felt safer to stay distant, to disappear instead of disappoint." Serafina's breath hitched gently. It explained so much. His hesitance, his quietness, the way he always stepped back before he stepped forward. "You don't have to disappear here," she whispered. Roman's eyes lifted slowly to hers. Something changed in them, something fragile, sincere, deeply trusting. And that trust settled into her like a soft weight, warm and real. Outside, the storm returned, wind brushing against the windows like a restless hand. Rowan exhaled, steadying himself. "There's more," he said. "Something I've never told anyone." Serafina nodded, feeling her pulse shift with quiet anticipation. "What is it?" she asked. Rowan hesitated for a long moment, then whispered, "It's something about the way I see you." The words lingered between them, delicate and impossible to ignore. Serafina's breath slowed, and the room fell utterly still. For a heartbeat, Serafina felt the room tilt, not physically, but emotionally, as if the air had shifted into a fragile silence. Rowan's words hung between them, soft yet impossibly heavy. "Something about the way I see you." She swallowed gently, unsure whether to breathe or hold her breath still. Outside, the storm eased into a softer rain, and the living room glowed with the warm, muted light of the small lamp on the side table. She kept her voice steady. "What do you mean, Rowan?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at his hands, as though searching for courage in the faint shadows that moved across his palms. When he finally lifted his face, his eyes carried a tenderness she'd never seen in him before. "I don't see you the way I see everyone else," he said quietly, "and that scares me more than I can explain." Serafina's pulse softened, but she didn't flinch away. She didn't sense danger, only raw honesty, raw enough to make her chest tighten in a way she wasn't prepared for. "Rowan," she whispered, unsure where to guide the moment. "I don't mean anything disrespectful," he added quickly. "You're Adrian's wife. You're someone I admire deeply, but I've never crossed any lines. I've always felt safer in your presence than I expected to feel with anyone." She felt warmth rise slowly in her heart, not the kind that threatened anything, but the kind that came when someone revealed a depth of trust they rarely gave away. It was the kind of truth that didn't ask for anything. It simply asked not to be ignored. "You're allowed to feel what you feel," she said softly. "It doesn't make you wrong. It makes you human." Rowan's eyes softened with gratitude. "That's why I came here tonight," he admitted, "because I knew you wouldn't turn it into something it isn't." Serafina nodded gently, feeling the weight of his honesty settle around them. She had always sensed that he held himself apart, building careful boundaries around his heart. Now, seeing those walls lower even a little felt strangely tender. "I never wanted to make you uncomfortable," he added. "You haven't," she assured him. "You've just been honest, and there's nothing unkind about honesty." Rowan exhaled in relief, leaning back slightly. "I've always tried to be strong," he murmured, "but I've learned something tonight. Strength isn't pretending everything is fine. Strength is letting someone see you when you're not." She felt the words settle deep inside her. "Rowan," she said gently, "you trusted me with something personal, and I'm honored, but I want you to know something too." He lifted his eyes. She continued softly, "Even before tonight, I always felt your kindness. You never said much, but you cared. It showed in the small ways, the quiet ways." He looked almost surprised. "You noticed that?" "Of course," she said, her smile tender. "I notice quiet people. They speak differently." His expression warmed, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, small but genuine. It made him look younger somehow, less burdened. The storm outside faded into a distant rumble, leaving the house wrapped in gentle rain. The silence between them felt calmer now, no longer tense but reflective. Rowan looked toward the window, gathering his thoughts. "I don't want this to cause any distance between us," he said quietly, "or between me and Adrian." "It won't," Serafina replied softly, "not if we understand each other, not if we keep things honest, clear, and kind." He nodded slowly, relieved. "Thank you," he murmured, "for listening and for not pulling away." Seraphina's heart tightened in a way she couldn't fully explain. There was no danger here, no crossing of lines, only two people sharing a moment of human vulnerability, a moment they both needed more than they realized. She glanced toward the clock on the wall. It was still early enough that Adrian wouldn't be home for a while. And yet, she felt something shifting around her, something delicate that needed careful handling. Rowan looked at her again, hesitation returning to his eyes. "There's one more thing I need to tell you," he whispered, "and I'm afraid this part might change how you see me." Seraphina inhaled softly, steadying herself. "What is it?" she asked. Rowan drew in a slow breath, gathering courage. And then, just as he parted his lips to speak, the front door handle rattled. They both froze. The soft rattle of the front door handle felt louder than the storm had been. Rowan went still, eyes wide, breath caught halfway in his chest. Seraphina's heart jumped, not out of guilt, there was nothing to feel guilty about, but from the sudden shift of the moment. She rose quietly, motioning for Rowan to stay where he was. "It's all right," she whispered. But inside, she wasn't entirely sure why it felt like a fragile moment slipping away. The door creaked open, and Adrian's voice called gently from the entryway, "Seraphina, are you still awake?" Relief washed through her. His tone was calm, warm, unaware of the emotional storm that had unfolded just moments ago. She stepped into the hallway. "I'm here. You're home early." Adrian hung his coat with a tired sigh. The storm had soaked the edges of his sleeves. The shift ended sooner than expected. I figured it was better to get home before the storm got worse. He offered a faint smile, then paused. "Who's here? I saw another pair of shoes outside." Seraphina's heart steadied. Rowan came by. He wasn't feeling well, and the storm caught him on the way home. I let him in. Adrian nodded, concerned but not alarmed. "Is he all right?" She hesitated for only a breath. "He needed someone to talk to." Adrian's expression softened instantly, the way it always did when it came to Rowan. "I'm glad he came here, instead of being alone." Seraphina exhaled quietly, grateful for her husband's gentle nature. She led Adrian back into the living room. Rowan stood as they entered, trying to hide every trace of vulnerability he'd shown earlier. His posture straightened, but the quiet in his eyes remained. "Hey," Adrian said with a warm smile. "Rough night?" Rowan nodded once. "Sorry to stop by so late." "You never have to apologize," Adrian said. "You're family." Rowan's expression flickered, gratitude mixed with something heavier, something unsaid. Adrian glanced between them. "Do you two want tea? I'll make some." Before Seraphina could respond, Rowan spoke softly. "Actually, I should probably head home before it gets too late." Adrian frowned lightly. "You sure? It's still raining." "I'll be fine," Rowan said, though his voice carried a quiet tremor Seraphina didn't miss. Adrian clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You know you're welcome to stay until the storm settles." Rowan nodded with a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you, I mean it." Seraphina watched him, sensing the weight behind his polite responses. He wasn't running from them, he was running from the moment they had been suspended in, the words he hadn't yet spoken, the emotion he wasn't ready for Adrian to see. When Rowan reached for his coat, Seraphina stepped forward slightly. "Let me walk you to the porch." Rowan hesitated, then nodded. They stepped into the faint glow near the back door. The storm had calmed into a soft drizzle. The porch light reflected small droplets that shimmered along the railing. Rowan turned toward her once more, his voice low. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause any tension." "You didn't," she whispered. He looked into her eyes, deeply, with an honesty that made her chest tighten again. "There's still something I wanted to say, the part I didn't get to finish." Seraphina felt her breath catch. "Then say it." Rowan shook his head gently. "Not tonight. Not while everything feels so delicate. His restraint touched her more deeply than anything he had confessed. He wasn't hiding, he was protecting something. Her, Adrian, himself, the fragile trust between all three of them. But before she could respond, Rowan held her gaze with a soft, unwavering sincerity. "Thank you for hearing me," he whispered, "and for not turning away." Her guard wavered again, quietly, instantly, not because she felt anything forbidden, but because she understood him now in a way she hadn't before. Trust like that was rare, and somehow she had become the person he chose to open his heart to. "I'm glad you came," she said softly. Rowan breathed out slowly, as though those words gave him enough strength to step back into the rain. He turned toward the steps. But before he left the porch entirely, he paused under the soft drizzle, glanced back at her, and said something that sent a gentle shiver through her. "I hope, when I tell you the rest, it won't change how you look at me." Seraphina's heart trembled, because she already knew it would. Seraphina didn't sleep easily after Rowan left. She lay awake beside Adrian, listening to the soft hum of the rain against the windows, feeling the weight of everything Rowan had held back, and everything he had finally let her see. Adrian slept peacefully, unaware of the quiet turning inside her. She wasn't torn between two people. She loved her husband deeply, steadily, without question. But Rowan's vulnerability had settled into her heart in a different way, like a delicate thread woven into the edges of her compassion. It wasn't about romance. It was about what it meant when someone long guarded finally trusted you enough to break. By morning, sunlight pushed through thin clouds and spilled into the kitchen. Seraphina brewed tea, hoping its warmth would steady her thoughts. Adrian joined her a few minutes later, hair slightly tousled, eyes still heavy with sleep. "You all right?" he asked, gently, noticing her quietness. She hesitated, just thinking about Rowan. Adrian nodded, worry flickering across his face. "He seemed off last night, more than usual. I hope he's okay." "He will be," Seraphina whispered, though she wasn't entirely certain. Adrian gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "He's lucky he has you to talk to. You've always had a way of making people feel safe." Her heart paused at the word, the same one Rowan had used. Safe. She wondered if Adrian realized how meaningful that was to someone who rarely let anyone close. After breakfast, she stepped outside. The storm had washed the street clean. The air felt new, softened by morning light. Without thinking too long, she slipped on her shoes and walked the short path to Rowan's house. She paused at his door, almost turning back. She didn't want to overwhelm him, but she also knew he had left too much unsaid to simply carry alone. Before she could knock, the door opened. Rowan stood there, eyes tired but gentle, as if he expected her. "Morning," he murmured. "Morning," she replied softly. "Can we talk?" He stepped aside without hesitation. Inside, the house was quiet, neat, touched by a stillness that made her chest ache. Rowan sat on the edge of his sofa, hands clasped, as though holding something fragile between them. "I didn't want to leave things the way they were," he said. "Neither did I." He lifted his gaze, searching her face. "I didn't come last night to complicate your life. I came because I was drowning in silence, and you were the only person who ever looked at me like I wasn't invisible." "Rowan," her voice trembled gently, not from fear, but from the tenderness of the truth he carried. "I need you to know," he continued slowly, "that the way I see you isn't something dangerous. It's something healing. You're the first person who made me believe I could trust someone without being hurt." Her guard fell again, instantly, softly, not in a romantic way, but in the way a heart naturally opens when someone speaks from the most honest part of their soul. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said. "Caring isn't wrong. Trust isn't wrong." He closed his eyes briefly, as if her words steadied him more than he expected. I care about you, he admitted, but not in a way that threatens anything. It's admiration, respect, gratitude. You helped me remember that connection doesn't have to be painful. A breath she didn't realize she'd been holding finally released. And I care about you too, she said softly, as someone who needed a friend, someone who needed to talk, someone who needed to feel seen. Rowan's shoulders loosened, emotion flickering across his expression. I thought telling you would change how you look at me. It has, she said, honestly. He stiffened slightly. She continued gently. I see you more clearly now, not as Adrian's quiet friend, but as someone who has survived far more than he ever admitted, and someone brave enough to trust. Rowan's breath shook, but this time with relief. Serafina reached out, resting her hand lightly on his. Whatever you're healing from, you're not alone anymore. Not truly. You have Adrian, and you have me, as a friend, as someone who cares, as someone who will always support you without crossing any lines. His eyes softened with gratitude so deep it almost glowed. Thank you, he whispered, for giving me a place to land. You deserve one, she said. For a long, peaceful moment, they sat together in quiet understanding, two people connected not by romance, but by trust, empathy, and the shared weight of unspoken battles. When she finally rose to leave, Rowan walked her to the door. The morning sunlight fell gently across his face, warming the shadows that had lingered there for years. As she stepped onto the porch, Rowan spoke one last time, voice steady for the first time. I'm going to be all right now, he murmured, because I finally let someone in. Serafina smiled, feeling the truth settle warmly in her heart. I'm glad, she said. You deserve peace. And as she walked home, she realized the night before hadn't complicated her life at all. It had reminded her of something quiet and profound. Sometimes, the most meaningful connections aren't romantic. They're the ones that teach us how to trust, how to stay open, and how to hold another person's truth gently. The story ends here, in the soft certainty that all three of them, Adrian, Rowan, and Serafina, would move forward with clearer hearts and stronger bonds.